Hi, everyone. This is Doug. It's a continuation of our series, Is It Possible That Paul Was an Herodian Infiltrator? And in this episode, I'm going to also bring out our memory of the other prophecy known as the Benjamite wolf prophecy, but put it in this same context. And that it goes by an abbreviation WISC. See that here? WISC. That means wolf in sheep's clothing. And so we'll go into that a little bit before we get launching, but this episode has a specific name. It's John Hurt's proof that Paul was an infiltrator. So we're going to review one of the contributors to comments on our videos. John did this back in April. I kept it all this time so I could keep searching and researching, and now I've corroborated everything he said. So I'm going to now bring out what he said that influenced me to head in this direction, and you'll see what it was in a minute. But I just want to now put this in context. An infiltrator who is an Herodian is obviously, the point is, this person didn't have a sincere purpose from the very beginning. And it was to pretend to be a sheep from the very beginning, knowing they were not a sheep. They're really serving Herod. So that's why you can read Romans 13, verses 1 and forward, saying, you have to treat the governing authorities, the rulers, as agents of God. They are agents of God. If you disobey them, you're disobeying God. And if you disobey them, you're subject to krima, judgment, condemnation, damnation. I mean, so it's clear that's just so Herodian and not biblical. The apostles say in Acts 5 that they have a duty to obey God, not man. So even though they're given an instruction by a legal authority and ruler, in fact, the high priest, to not preach Christ, they say, no, we have to obey God, not man. So Paul has a completely different view, and that was from the very beginning. And so Jesus talks about this, a wolf in sheep's clothing. So from the outside, you think they're a Christian sheep, but inside, they're ravening wolves. That's what Jesus says. So let's listen to Matthew 7, verse 15. And Jesus says, beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravening wolves. Matthew 7, verse 15. So does Paul come claiming that he has revelation from Christ? Yes. Doesn't quote him. Says I'm not allowed to quote him. It's illicit for me to quote him. 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 3 to 6. Can't quote him, but just trust me, I'm speaking him. Who comes to you in sheep's clothing? Did Paul claim he was a Christian? Yes. But inwardly are ravening wolves. Was he a ravening wolf? Well, we have a prophecy about this very person, a ravening wolf, in Genesis 49:27. So listen to this, and God's going to tell you how you would know they're ravening or not. Are they being destructive of Christianity? Benjamin, someone of the tribe of Benjamin, Paul says this twice that he was a Benjamite, is a ravenous wolf. In the morning he shall devour the prey. So in the morning he kills Christians. But that wasn't enough. It didn't work. Now he takes another mode. In the evening, at night, he shall divide the spoil. What's he going to do? He's going to divide up the church into two. Instead of it being a Jewish led church with God-fearer Gentiles coming in and basically now accepting a Messiah, Yeshua, and following him as the prophet and Messiah. That's not what ends up happening. That's how it started. That's what you see in Acts 21. It's still going on, very healthy church. But Paul is going a different direction. He's pulling away the Gentiles and giving them a lawless gospel, very surely, and a very easy gospel, very easy peasy thing. So that's obviously very attractive. Don't have to do anything, and you just get it by believing the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. So now you'll say, Doug, well, if what you're saying is true, then the early church would have found this. Yes, in a way, they did find this, but they were looking at the Greek Septuagint, and they're reading it wrong. All the commentators in the early church thought Genesis 49:27 was about Paul. But if you change the word spoil into food, spoil means the illicit gain you've gained from, killing and destroying another opposing force or army. You then have their spoils, their armament, their food, and all that. That's considered illicit gains from war. But if you call it food, divide the food, well, that's very different. And that's what ended up happening. Excuse me, I'm in the wrong spot. Okay, here we are. 200s, church in the early 200s unanimously thought this was about Paul. Tertullian thought so. Others thought so. And that's the only reason why Tertullian even hung on to Paul, because he found he was not a true apostle. That's his book against Marcion. You're never told that. You just read that. He says he doesn't have evidence of being an apostle, but I'm going to hold on to him because I'm told in Genesis 49:20-70, he's the Benjamite wolf. They killed in the morning, but divided food in his later. And that's not what it says in Hebrew. It says divided the spoils. And so when that was found out, is silence. When that was found out in the Roman Catholic Church era, silence. Nobody brought this up again, even though it was brought up multiple times, as Paul had a true prophetic fulfillment in the law. See? But when they didn't like what it said, they ignored it completely. But it still fits. Anyway, back and listen to some of the evidence that John Hurt, supporter of this channel and a great friend, he did this comment to one of my videos. It was my video on Thomas Paine, of all things. So he was trying to tell me, hey, Doug, you need to see this. And what I want to let you guys all know is this goes to show you, here we are in October of 2023. He wrote me this over 6 months ago. I put these things aside so I can get to them later and study them. And this was influential for me wondering, hey, maybe I am not paying attention, but he was giving me more facts than I'd ever seen put all together. So this is not going to be familiar to most of you. I had never seen these arguments before. Listen to what he says. So it's a great job, Doug, on the Thomas Paine view on Paul. Then he says this. One explanation of Paul's lineage is that he is of the royal house of Herod as either Saul, the brother of Costobarus, or some other family member. This would explain why Paul was born a Roman citizen, Acts 22, verse 28. And by the way, I have all these passages ready to go, and I'm going to show you what they are before I let you all go. So I'll show you what he cited, did say what he says it says. So this would explain why Paul was born a Roman citizen, as Roman citizenship for an entire household at birth was given to the royal house of Judea and other provinces to secure them as allies of Rome. Absolutely, that's the case. So scholars will tell you this list was kept in Rome in Caesar's office, and it's a very short list. It could fit on a couple of pages. It was just meant for the security personnel, the kings, rulers, princes, all the people you need to protect. They need to get the highest authority level protection, and everybody else is sort of on their own. But I digress. Let's continue. It would also explain, John goes on, why Paul was rescued from the mob by the Roman government, Acts 22. Why he was kept in Herod's judgment hall and not some dungeon or jail, Acts 23, verse 35. And why he was so important that he was guarded by 200 soldiers, 70 horsemen, and 200 spearmen to take him to Caesarea. So when he's taken away from the mad crowd at Jerusalem about the defilement of the temple, when Trophimus, his friend, Paul's friend, went in past the middle wall separation, they're furious. The temple's been abominated, and now they want to kill Paul. They're blaming him, and the Romans come to guard him with 200 soldiers, 70 horsemen, 200 spearmen to take him to Caesarea. I mean, come on. Can't you see this? What he'd done was so grievous, and at the same time, he was a top-level dog who had to be protected. Top dog means top of the dog pile, if you will. Okay. Paul seems to be on friendly terms with Agrippa, as Agrippa was Paul's relative through Herod. Paul's relation to Herod also explains why the chief priest would send Paul to Damascus, Acts 9. So John knows, obviously, that the high priests exclusively were appointees by the Herodians in the era of from Christ's birth period all the way up to the time of his crucifixion and afterwards, as it was outside their jurisdiction. Damascus, by the way, he's pointing out, is not inside the high priest's jurisdiction. So you have to have a jurisdiction that it goes outside of Judea. Okay. And where would that? Syria is a non-Judea, non-Roman area. But you have treaties and relationships with the nation of Syria. And so if you want to go into there, you have to have a different level of authority, and that would be the Roman government ability to tell a client state, we want this person, this Christian or whoever Paul's persecuting, to be taken out of your country, and we're going to bring them back to Jerusalem. So that's right. You have a jurisdictional conflict because unless Paul has this higher rank that's even higher than the rank of the high priest on his side, meaning a higher rank than the high priest can never exert, which is he could never exert authority over Syria next door, but that could be exerted by a Herodian authority, could give that extra license necessary to go get somebody. But I digress. So as Damascus was outside the high priest jurisdiction in Herod's, but Damascus was ruled by a relative of Herod, and Paul would have better access to any legal proceedings in Damascus since he was of the Herodian royal family. Paul's connection also explains why Luke was able to get access to the Roman correspondence concerning Paul, Acts 23, verse 26, something impossible for a normal Roman prisoner. Even in Rome, Paul spent 2 years in his own hired house awaiting his trial, something that would be impossible for a nobody that lived off the wages of a tent maker. Now, I'm going to have that in another episode, so I'm not going to go through that detail. And then John says this, which is interesting to think about. Paul was so rich and important that the books of Luke and Acts may have been written for the magistrates at his trial at Rome. Again, something only the royal house of Herod could afford. Yes, and that's something I think you and I all have to realize is Luke is never mentioned after the book of Acts, meaning there isn't anything really written about him. All we know is his name had to be Lucius in Latin. Who is he? And why is he writing this? And so an attorney named Mauck wrote a book called In Defense of Paul, proving that the obvious recipient, most excellent Theophilus, was actually a Roman magistrate judge who would be the assistant to prepare an appeal that Paul had filed. Paul said, I appealed to Caesar when he was in front of Herod Agrippa, and they had to send him off to Rome because of that. And as a result, a assistant magistrate judge such as Theophilus would be assigned to the case. And so when Nero would show up to hear the case, it's already been prepared, all the rulings are already done, and he just has to rubber stamp it, or he can ask more questions and reverse the ruling, whatever. It's basically all done through the assistant magistrate, and that's who Theophilus was, according to Mr. Mauck's analysis and research, particularly the address given him of most excellent Theophilus, and I'll get into that in a minute. All right, so now let's take a look at what the verses are he cites. Acts 22, verse 28, and the chief captain answered, and with a great sum obtained I this freedom, meaning his citizenship as a Roman. And Paul said, but I was freeborn. So Paul's saying, I got it when I was born. Now, what is this context? This is when Paul is trying to explain who he is to the captain of the guard, when the Jews go crazy, when Paul's friend Trophimus from Ephesus, his companion, had come to the temple with him, but Paul let him wander away. Paul went to a ceremonial bath. That's his alibi when he's asked, where were you when Trophimus defiled the temple? And he says, I was in a ceremonial bath. I wasn't involved. He walked through the middle wall separation. That's his own fault. But you see, Paul actually told the Ephesians, of which Trophimus was one of them, a member of the Ephesus church, and he told them the middle wall of separation of the temple has been taken away. That's in Ephesians chapter 2. So, and he's denigrating the necessity of doing circumcision anymore, because circumcision only had to be required either to attend the Passover meal or to enter the temple. And if the middle wall of separation has been taken down, the barrier that prevented Gentiles entering uncircumcised was gone. And by the way, the Herodians were always pushing to get permission from the Jews to do the sacrifices to their gods at the Temple of Jerusalem. And the Jews kept refusing them. And that was a big problem. Pontius Pilate wanted to get rid of the law. The Herodians want to get rid of that law. Because they have no temples. They're trying to be kind and considerate to the Jews, but now they have no temples to themselves sacrifice to. So they wanted to do it at the place the Jews thought was special, but the Jews are saying no, and they kept pushing, and that's exactly what is Paul's point. He's trying to advocate for the position of the Herodians, get rid of circumcision, and therefore we can go to the temple as Gentiles. That's what that's all about. You and I are all dumb Gentiles. We don't know the historical context. We don't know why that's going on. So anyway, back to this. This is a person saying, hey, he's kind of mystified. How do you have this thing from birth? That means he was born into this family. He didn't have to buy it through a political influence or favor from a governor or something like that. He literally is part of the governor's family. He is part of the Herodian hierarchy. And that's why he has got this special privilege. And that's very important to see. This guy himself couldn't understand. How do you have a higher authority than me? Oh, I was born with a Roman citizenship. That tells the Roman officer everything he needs to know. He was a member of a family, a military family, or governing authority, or exactly what the Herodians were, a ruler a group who the Romans made an agreement with, that they would be designated as the kings over the region of Judea, and they would rule on their behalf and collect taxes for the Roman government. But otherwise, they're pretty much allowed to exercise their own independent authority, other than what they had to do was do the bidding of Rome when necessary. Acts 23, verse 23. He called unto him 2 centurions, saying, Make ready 200 soldiers to go to Caesarea, and horsemen 70, and spearmen 200, and at the third hour of the night. So now what's happening is the Romans go, okay, the Jews are furious at what happened in the temple today. This uncircumcised guy from Ephesus went there. This guy who's been born a Roman citizen, you know what that means, everybody. We got to protect him, give him top-notch, number one priority. He's like a head of state. That's how they're treating him, head of state quality, ladies and gentlemen, because being born with a birth certificate signified something to this centurion. He called him. I think he's the captain of the guard. This captain of the guard is totally shaking in his boots. We have to have everybody possible on this case. So he gets how many soldiers? Make ready 200 soldiers to go to Caesarea. That's like a war, my friends. And horsemen 70. That's 60 men on horses. That's 260 men total, 60 of which are on horses. Oh, wait, 70, 70 horsemen with 70 horses. And spearmen, get this, 200. So how many forces do we have? We've got 200 soldiers, and you got 70 men on horses with horses, and then we got 200 men with spearmen. We got over 400. We got over 470. We almost have 500 troops protecting this one man. What does that tell you, ladies and gentlemen? John, thank you very much. I really think that I just never processed it. See, this is why this is such a good. I love YouTube because people who are helpful and point out things that will are negatives or positives. But of course, I have a rule: you have to cite things. You can't just tell me stuff and you don't provide cites. Notice what John does; he provides cites for everything. I can go back and look at it. So if you want me to see what you're doing and it's not making me work, you literally give me the citations. You're saving me all this time. That would be very helpful. So literally, this is amazing. Virtually 500 troops are taking Paul from the temple at Jerusalem to Caesarea to Herod's, and then Herod has a compound there, and we'll see. Then John cites this, Acts 23:26. Claudius Lysias unto the most excellent governor Felix sends greeting. Now, I want you to focus on something, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Mauck, in his book In Defense of Paul, said that the address, most excellent, is how you would address a magistrate's judge in that appeal that Paul is in at the time of the end of the book of Acts. So in the book of Acts, we're waiting for this appeal to be heard. Both the volume entitled Luke, the Gospel of Luke, is addressed to Most Excellent Theophilus. And again, I'll show you later. Well, let me just show you now. Here's how it's addressed in Luke 1, verse 3. It's addressed to Most Excellent Theophilus. And then again, verse 1 of Acts, he addresses, O Theophilus, one more time. But this address, Most Excellent, matches the way you would address, right here, you can see it yourself, the Most Excellent Governor Felix. What does that tell you? That the magistrate judge, being Theophilus, is a reasonable conclusion because these two books, the book of Acts, the book of Luke, are intended to explain to pagans Christianity and give a complete defense, thorough defense to Paul for not having been present when Trophimus violated the temple and passed that middle wall separation. It's very important that in that account, Paul says, I was in a ceremonial bath when that all went on. When that outcry happened, I was in a ceremonial bath doing the vow that the church at Jerusalem, James in particular, had ordered me to do to prove that I was law compliant. And that's in Acts 21, if you want to see that sequence. And so that Acts 21 sequence is not there for no irrelevant purpose. It was there to prove why Paul's alibi was true, and it would be backed up by James the Just. That James the Just was a famous figure in that era, Jesus' brother, and the Romans probably respected him too. All the people of Jerusalem did. And so if James just gave this order to Paul, everybody knew James Just's instruction would be followed, and Paul would be in that ceremonial bath doing that vow he was supposed to do under the Nazirite vow at that time. That would be a legitimate excuse. And that's the excuse that Paul gave, and he was not therefore with Trophimus when Trophimus goes through the middle wall separation. That was the key of this whole case, and how the Paul would have a defense on appeal. And Luke, likely, in my view, when it says he's a doctor, I think people are misreading it. There was no mention that he's a medical doctor or anything like that that would be specific to that. But what I think he is, he's a lawyer. It maybe has dual roles. He could be a doctor, but he's really primarily acting as a lawyer. He's preparing legal briefs to win a case, and he wins. This case, he wins. Nero acquits Paul, and that's important. That's mentioned in both Eusebius and Jerome. Now let's continue on. Acts 23, verse 35. And I will hear thee, said he, when thine accuser are also come, and he commanded him to be kept in Herod's judgment hall. So now when he goes to Caesarea, Paul is now in Herod's judgment hall. This is everything that you see is happening. Herod is involved at every stage. The armament that's being wrapped around this guy to protect him is almost 500 soldiers, right? Spearmen and men on horses and soldiers on foot. I mean, they're treating him as royalty. There's no doubt about it. And they take him and then when he's waiting, he has to wait in Herod's judgment hall. He's going to be in a nice area. He's not being put into prison. He's not putting into the cells. He's being treated as if he's an Herodian. Oh yes, he is an Herodian. He says so in Romans 16:13. Salute my relative Herodian, which means little Herod in Greek. Let's continue. All right. And then the last thing that John referenced was Acts 9, verse 1, this evidence that Paul gets authority from the high priest to do something that's outside of Judea, inside of another principality. And this principality, John points out, is actually ruled by another Herod. So remember, the Herodians are directly engaged by the Romans to rule their authority. And this area of Syria was, I think it's called the Nabatean principality. It's also being ruled by Herod, and that's probably due to Herod's influence from Judea, where the Romans put them there. Then this Nabatean kingdom also had another Herod family there. So Paul is being protected everywhere, and he has this ability to enforce a law inside of Damascus, Syria, in the Nabatean kingdom that shouldn't otherwise be, but he has this connection. It's his family. He is a relative. That's what he admits in essence in 1613. And then when you combine it with Acts 13, verse 1, where it says there, Luke is talking about a series of people at Antioch Church, and one of them is Manaen, who was a childhood friend of Herod the Tetrarch and Saul. So Saul grows up as a childhood friend of Manaen and Herod the Tetrarch, if you put it all together. So he is living, comes from royalty. Let's put it that way, in that region, and that's who he's serving. Let me just see what else I want to say. Okay. And I guess that's it. So this goes and backs up what I'm saying about Paul is a infiltrator on behalf of the Herodian party, and as an infiltrator, that means he is not truly even has anything to do with Christ. It's all made up. He knows who he's serving. He knew it from the very beginning. So this is different than the way I've been perceiving Paul for a long time. And so what John gave me here gave me a lot of thought. And then when I'm listening to Operation Messiah, when I'm listening to Eisenman, I'm looking at all this evidence. It does stack up that he is, from the beginning, it was all a fable. There is no Damascus Road experience. All right. God bless everyone. Take care. Ciao. Bye.